Hi, I'm Pattu from freefincal. Today, let's talk about the performance of international equity funds versus the S&P 500 total returns in INR. When it comes to international equity funds, there are two types. One is the fund of funds, that is, they will be investing in a actively managed fund domiciled in Luxembourg or something like that, or they will be directly investing in the in international stocks, for example like ICICI US equity blue chip fund. So if you take a look at the number of funds, we have about 35 funds that are at least 1 year old and 33 funds that are 2 years and 3 years old. Now in this 33 funds, there are many funds which are thematic funds. For example, there is a Birla fund which invests only in agricultural stocks. There is a DSP World Mining Fund. So there is a power fund. I think power. If I'm not wrong, I don't remember which AMC. So there are some funds. Then there are some funds that invest only in emerging markets, in the ASEAN region, things funds like that. So if you don't make that distinction, then only 5 out of 35 funds have outperformed the S&P 500 in INR total returns over the last 1 year. 8 out of 33 in the last 2 years, 5 out of 33 in the last 3 years. Now, if you eliminate all those thematic and geographic funds, then you have only 19 funds, and only 17 are 2 or 3 years old. So, out of these 19 funds, only 3 have outperformed the S&P 500. 6 out of 17 have outperformed over the last 2 years, and 4 out of 17 over the last 3 years. So, that's a very poor number, and you can guess why this is so. This is because one is fundamentally the S&P 500 is hard to beat. That is, the underlying fund in of itself would have not bet the S&P 500. Second, then there is an expense ratio of the underlying fund, there is an expense ratio of the fund of fund. If you add all that, and then the underperformance would be natural. The problem is that this is one side of the issue. I mean, that is why I've been always saying active funds are a problem. So the options are passive funds. But when it comes to passive funds, there are only two options. One, you have the Motilal Oswal S&P 500 index fund, and then you have their own NASDAQ 100 ETF and the NASDAQ 100 fund of fund. Kotak has got a NASDAQ 100 fund of fund just launched a couple of months ago, February 18. These are the options. I think a couple of more funds are coming, but we will see. Now, the problem with the passive funds is the tracking error. I have discussed this tracking error in today's article. I will talk about this in the next couple of days. There is a significant tracking error both for NASDAQ and the S&P 500. So there is a 3%, 4% deviation whether you take the total returns or as I was informed on Twitter, there is a tax on dividends. So the dividends are not there's a 30% tax on dividends before they are reinvested. So that has to be accounted for. So you should not be using the S&P 500 total returns for comparing the passive funds. You should be using the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ 100 net total return index. That is, the net means that the dividend tax will be taken into account. But even if you do that, there is a very significant 3%, 4% kind of deviation with respect to the index if you look at the article today. So that is another problem. So on one side you have high expenses, underperformance of the index. On the other side, you have passive funds which have a fairly high tracking error. So this space is non-ideal. I mean, still we need more options here. I think we need fund of funds, passive fund of funds that should be investing in truly low cost, low tracking error index funds or ETFs. There are several of them. If you look at the S&P 500 universe, not just Vanguard. Many people will immediately say Vanguard. Not just Vanguard. You have iShares, you have Fidelity, you have a lot of AMCs offering very low cost, very excellent low tracking error kind of funds. Now AMC should be ready to create fund of funds with those as the underlying indices. So until that happens, I mean, the space is still incomplete. Of course, as rightly pointed out by Pranav Merchant, if I don't, I'm assuming the name I got right. He mentioned that the Kotak fund invests in the iShare Nasdaq 100 ETF. So the tracking error will be lower. The expense ratio is also lower. So that is a fund to watch out for. You should have a look at it, compare it with the Nasdaq Nasdaq 100, Motilal Oswal's fund of fund, that is. Compare them. I believe the Kotak may have an edge. I mean, it may not happen. The tracking errors may come into play, but it does. The Kotak Nasdaq 100 fund may have an edge, but the space is still very young. I still feel the Motilal Oswal fund, the S&P 500 index fund, is still the better choice than the actively managed international funds, but they have to do better in terms of tracking error. Let's see how the space evolves.